it's your girl KV
and Celine.
and we're back with another episode of the Hood Health Report.
Okay, so this week's episode is called Big Bank Take Little Bank. We're going to be talking about the banks collapsing, so we're going to jump right on in. Am I jumping right in?
Yes,
Okay.
jump right on in.
Great. So, have you heard about the Silicon Valley bank collapse?
Sure, what happened?
Okay, I thought I was going to let you, say a couple words, say what you know, or you don't know anything. Okay.
I don't know nothing.
Okay. So,
This is a topic brought to you by the man behind the cam.
right. So, for the Silicon Valley bank collapse, I'll just start off by saying this. I didn't have a lot of understanding about it before the episode, but we have done some research, and we thought this episode would be very important to everybody.
Right.
So, what I can say, I'm gonna just give it a quick sum up, I guess, so just so we can get everybody, introduced if they're not introduced to the topic or not. A bank is collapsing in California. Well, a bank collapsed in California. Basically, this happens when the interest rates are high and people take their money out of the banks, and then they're not able to have money in the bank. That's the easiest way I would say to sum it up. The first article that I read, it goes into topic about a sweetheart deal with the SVB, so Silicon Valley Bank. And with this sweetheart deal, the first citizens score a great deal. They're going to get it's going to be a $20 billion hit. But basically the insurance that they are using for the deposit, they're going to get that money back. And then after the deal closes, they will have $219 billion in assets. That's double what they had at the time of this time last year. And this would make it among one of the 25 largest banks in the U.S. and put it at the cusp of being classified as too big to fail, which is important for banks because they don't want you never want the bank to fail or that system to fail. The losers in the sweetheart deal, and the reason why it's called a sweetheart deal, is that the other banks and their customers will have to pay back that estimate of $20 billion cost to replenish the deposit from the insurance fund. And that's about 15% of the entire fund. By comparison, in 2000, there's been 214 bank failures between 2011 and 2022, and that only cost about $12.4 billion to repay that money.
That was the most shocking part of the article, is that they pretty much almost doubled what they had spent over the slot of a decade just on one bank. And they said, they're doing all of this to make sure that they basically keep us as the consumers satisfied to think, oh, well, just because that bank collapsed doesn't mean that all of the banks are going to collapse. But they used quite a bit of money, and then they got it on a sale. I think they said it was a $16.5 billion discount that they ended up buying the securities for. And First Citizens, their shares grew by 50% because they were unsure how this would go across to the public, but they did see that right after this happened, the shares grew and people were responding positively in a way to the deal. Oh, and one thing about this article, they said that hedge funds might have been interested in buying Silicon Valley Bank, but the FDIC ruled them out for political reasons. And that was interesting to me because I'm like, all of this is politically driven. So what would make another entity, just not useful in this way? Because once we get into some articles, we see that all of this is just the government telling people what to do.
You can buy it or you can't buy it. Or you don't want
you better buy it. We'll bail you out if something happens, but you basically don't have a choice. So but I guess they wanted to keep it in-house if that's the case. So maybe that's why.
All right. So do you believe that the SVB or Silicon Valley bank collapse happened because they were too woke or not woke enough?
I think that certain people would want us to believe that it happened because they're too woke. Because this next article gets into how a few banks, Silicon Valley and I think JP Morgan previously had invested all of this money into Black entrepreneurs and making sure that they worked to close the wage gap and worked to close that wealth gap, making sure that Black entrepreneurs had the resources, had the money, had the networking to really pull through and be at the same playing field as their white counterparts.
It goes into a little bit about that. It said that it was estimated that like every dollar of $100 in the U.S. ventures capital investments went to Black investments. And they also talked about how some of the deposits in 2018 through 2022 were made for Black businesses and stuff of that nature. But however, whenever the FDC has the insurance limit of that $250,000, if it goes over that money, over that amount in the bank, then it won't be covered. And they were, in a sense, having more money in the bank than what was going to be covered by insurance.
Yeah, and I always bring up the FDIC when I'm talking to people in regular conversation because people always like, you don't have Cash App? Why don't you have Cash App? Because your Cash App funds are not insured and you should have your things in a bank where your things are insured and you can call somebody to check on it.
See, I never knew that.
Yes, your funds are just lost if something happens on Cash App.
So when I hit the little button and it sends to my bank, then it's fine. But when it's just sitting in the Cash App, it's not really there. So I just need to.
I mean, it's there, but if something happens to it, there's nobody to call to say, something happened to my funds, can you do XYZ, as if it would be if something happened to your credit card with the bank.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So you lose your Cash App card, you better connect it as fast as you can because it's gone. But yeah, so the FDIC, when people deposit into these banks, the limit is $250K. So people have been doing, and they just call it a bank run. I thought it would have a fancier term than that. And I'm sure they do within
the banking,
their banking industry, but they were like, oh, the bank run. And I was like, the bank run? And that's literally what they were calling it. It confused me a bit. So people were taking, if they had $500K in the bank, they would have to take that $250K out and take it to another bank or another entity because they wanted to make sure that their funds were insured. And so this article also talks about how back in 2020, JP Morgan announced that they were putting $30 billion behind an effort to narrow that wealth gap. They also give the purest definition of woke in finance, and that is the effort to expand markets to lend to new communities of entrepreneurs, sign up previously untapped customers, and increase prosperity for a wider range of people. So in my conspiracy theory mind,
okay, let's hear it.
Because you have to tap into it sometime just to really think for yourself and believe what you believe. You know what I mean? Some people just read something and they're like, oh, I agree with that, so that's the narrative I'm gonna run with. Now I like to explore different things in my mind. So in my conspiracy theory mind, it definitely is giving that they wanted these particular banks to collapse because of this. Not that they tanked because they were being woke, but they didn't mind sacrificing those banks because they were the ones to do something new and invest in a community where
innovative.
Being innovative in a space where, they opened up the gates, basically. They opened up the gates for Black people to get into that business world because one in every $100 going to Black people venture capitalists, that's very sad. That's a very sad figure. Yeah. So shout out to JP Morgan and SVB for attempting to lessen that gap.
The article also said, this quote that I thought was really interesting. Anytime anything fails, they say people are being distracted by being woke, basically using that go woke, go broke slogan. And I was just like, oh, wow, that's how they look at it.
That go woke, go broke was.
And then also, on the contrary, which was so, eye-opening as well, is the Silicon Valley Bank was not exactly super diverse. They talked about how only 6% of the U.S. employees are Black, and that there was only one Black director on that 12-member board, and that they were trying to make, they said they were trying to make it more diverse, but it hadn't even happened yet. So that's interesting that they were so big on it being like, oh, it's a woke company, or that's what they were trying to promote.
So they had given $11 billion to the program, the woke program, basically. And they said while they have many companies around that would be willing to, pick up those deposits and kind of fill in the gaps for those people, there aren't nearly as many that have been intentional about supporting the Black founders. So the banks are literally holding off on saving certain accounts and securities because they don't want to enlarge the Black wealth community, basically.
Yep.
I gotta go again. I can finish it. We gotta finish. It's not gonna be too long.
All right. So, do you have any ideas of why banks are failing, or like, you think it's like coincidence? I heard your conspiracy theory a little bit earlier.
So, from what I gathered, I'm guessing all of the loans, all of the things that were used in the, I don't want to say cleanup of COVID, but in that COVID recovery type of period for businesses, they kind of have to recoup that. That's my guess. I'm not sure. We can have some business people in to tell us, the real and the exacts in due time. But I think that it was, all of the money that was pushed out for whatever types of loans for business owners, they're now like, oh, well, we pushed out all this money to save these big businesses, so now what? So now they have these loan bailouts to, these bank bailouts to support their money loss.
So there is about 190 banks that are at risk for failure right now, and that's if only half of the depositors decided to like withdraw their money. I feel like that was very interesting because just think about it. If somebody's like nervous about their money, people start wanting to take their money out of different things. So the fact that they said there's that many banks on the cusp of like, if even half of the people start to withdraw money, they would be at risk of failing. And what I realized from that was that, because I don't know much about like a business failing. I don't have like my own business where I would have to like, see how that worked if it fails. But a lot of the times with the banking businesses, it's because interest rates are rising. And I know that's something I do look at. Like, I don't know a lot about banking, but I do know if the interest rate is going up, I'll be like, okay, well, that's not good for me. So as the interest rate rises, the lower fixed interest rate is that they pay for the bond is no longer attractive to investors. So that makes the investors want to go ahead and pull their money out of those banks because they're like, well, I'm not getting a good return on this anyway.
And they called this interest hike aggressive. They said it was a very aggressive interest hike because they're trying to combat inflation and all of the money loss. So yeah, they see that this aggressive move caused other people to reply aggressively, and now it's just a lot of money being thrown around. And it's also reminded me that the banking people, we have the power. You know what I mean? Because they said if only half of the people that bank at these companies were to take out their monies, then they would tank as well. And that's almost 190 other banks. So it reminded me that, ultimately the power is, within the banking people to put their money in for them to have those assets and have that that backing to say we can give loans or we can do these things. So it'll be interesting to see. It
revolves around us.
It'll be interesting to see how those trends work out over the next few months. They also said the timing coincided with the financial difficulties many customers were dealing with that caused them to withdraw their funds. So basically, like, since people were already feeling the effects of COVID and they're already still in that recovery mode, then they see something like this happening and it just caused people to be even more cautious and just hurry up and take their money out and either keep it or take it to another bank.
Okay. Yep. Yeah, I would do the same. So the next question is kind of more of a like, as a business thought process. So do you think it's important to make tweaks to certain things? So like would you run anything by people before you make a tweak if you were like a business, since you have a business? Would you, do you run things by people, or do you feel like the tweaks that you make are, good enough to make that you don't need anybody else's backing on your decisions is your decision?
Oh, it depends on how many people it affects.
Okay.
Some decisions, I'll admit, I'm just like, I'm the boss. It's going to be this way. We'll figure it out in the end. And some decisions, I'm like, ooh, this might be a little difficult. We might need to get everybody's opinion on this.
So the reason I asked that is because this next article, which was talking about how it flashed red and what changes they made that increased all of this to the point where it was about to fail, was the bank Silicon Valley executives. They started changing the model. And when they were changing the model, they were just like going in and making like minor tweaks and stuff. The Silicon Valley Bank, they started making small tweaks to their business model. And at first it was just thought that like these small minor tweaks would have like minimal impact. And then some of them were like just raising the interest rate to a higher interest rate. But they didn't realize that doing these things and not like necessarily combating or talking to everybody within the company, that this would have such a negative effect. And they also mentioned in this article that they made like a whole compliance metric for it. So they knew that what they were doing would have some kind of effect, because if they didn't think it would have any effect, they wouldn't have thought to like put time aside to make sure that, oh, okay, how does this fit into our compliance? Or like, what would this look like if we did raise the interest rates?
So Jamie Dimon is a connected big banker who rescued the bank system in 2008, and now he's being called upon to do it all over again. So First Republic was showing signs of tanking, and he suggested that 11 different banks collectively deposit $30 billion in order to show confidence and show to the customers like, hey, we will have the money to front whatever. We're still operating as a big bank operates. But they were unsure of how the effects would really take. They saw the shares move up a little bit, but it wasn't enough to really say if the people still had confidence in the banking system. So in 2008, he built up JP Morgan by buying Washington Mutual and Bear Stearns Bank, and used that capital to really build up JP Morgan. And so once things started happening current day, the government officials, the Treasury representatives, things of that nature, they reached out to him, not even to bring in his ideas, but to carry out their ideas. So that was the funniest part to me. I guess maybe the familiar face of, oh, this is who did it the last time, so let's have this person do it. But it seemed to me that even when they called him in, they just told him it was a mandate. He didn't really have a decision. It wasn't like they brought him in for his opinion. It wasn't, oh, do you think should happen, or do you think that should happen? It was very much, we need XYZ to happen, and you have the connections and you've done this before, so make it happen.
Right.
And there was this back and forth of, well, I asked these people if they would invest, but they were unsure, so I asked these people, and it was just a lot of back and forth. But ultimately, they did get the job done. They did get the deposits into the bank. And he also said that although he successfully saved the banking system back in 2008, that it was a very expensive mistake because he had to pay a lot of fines related to the new subsidiaries prior to their conduct. So there's that. So the $30 billion bailout took the form of refundable deposits that could be paid back in as few as 4 months. So that was just crazy to me. So it's like you're not even really investing. You're just loaning out some money. Because if anything happens, you immediately get that money back. So, you know, more government shenanigans, more government shenanigans. So they said when the customers did the bank run, Bank of America, Citigroup, and Wells Fargo saw a sudden influx in their branches. So that was interesting to me because that was one thing I wanted to look up, is where the bank that I use fell on this list. Were they in danger of collapsing, or were they one of the banks who received all of the customers from the collapsing banks?
The only thing I was going to add is that with him doing the bailout, or if he if they did decide, when they did decide to do this again, that it was fully backed by the government and they would be reimbursed for any of the money that they lost. And I feel like that was interesting because it's like kind of like a backdoor government bailout. That's what they call it. They call it a backdoor government bailout. So if they were to lose anything, then they would be reimbursed for their losses. And then I guess because, this really didn't affect me too much in 2008, the recession. I just thought to myself, like, do you think this is going to be do you think it would be similar to that? If it continues at this rate?
I don't think it'll be as bad. But then again, back in 2008, I was, a fresh new adult. So how I viewed things was a lot different than how I view things now. Now I'm looking at mortgage rates, credit card rates, and all of these different things, to whereas back in 2008, those weren't really my concerns. I just saw it from a kid's standpoint of seeing my mom or other people talk about the recession and things that they were going through.
So does this remind you at all of that, or it doesn't hit? Yeah, I was gonna say it doesn't hit me like that either. So when they were talking about like calling in the chief executive that dealt with everything during that first collapse, I was wondering to myself, like, well, is there really like a bigger reason? Like, is there something we should be more concerned about? Because why would they bring such a big player into it if it's not something that we should be super, super concerned about? But then I'm like, well, maybe they're just trying to do like, where they're trying to keep their ducks in a row from the jump so that we're not even having to worry about how everything was in 2008. More so speaking on that subject of like, 2008, but not really. How do you think this will affect us in the upcoming months and years? For me, after reading everything, I think that the repercussions of whatever decisions are made now will affect us for like not only months, but years to come. So I think it's very important that everyone is like paying attention to like where their assets are, how much money they have in the bank. I know I personally called my dad and I was just like, hey, I don't really know. Like, I don't know. And he starts going into it with me. He sent me YouTube video. You need to understand this, Celine. You need to understand this. I'm not playing with you. And I was like, okay. So like I feel like a lot of people, they have like general understanding about like, how the banking stuff works. But I think it's important for us to understand too, now that a lot of stuff is going digital, that we have to do our own research on these topics and stuff of that nature. So I do think it'll affect us for months and years to come. And I just also think that it's important that if you have money in banks and stuff like that, not necessarily that you take it out or do anything drastic like that, because I don't think that's necessarily what needs to happen. You just need to know what you have, and also my dad was saying, have like something put up not in the bank. Like it just like a safe or something. Like you should never put all of your stuff in one basket anyways. And I was like, yeah, Dad, you're right.
Have a little apocalypse kit.
Yeah.
You gotta have some cash in your apocalypse
like,
kit.
Celine, how would you put everything in one place? Like have it spread out a little bit so that way, like if something was to go wrong in one place, you're not fully dependent on that one thing. And I'm like, yeah. Made me think about that.
I think the main question I have coming off of reading these articles is they said we would have the $20 billion to replenish the deposit insurance fund. So my main question is, where is this money coming from? Does that mean more bank fees for the customer? Because that was the first thing I thought of, is like, if I see that my bank is now charging me $50 for something that they used to charge $12 from, I'm going to immediately be like, God, this federal insurance fund gotta get replenished. $20 billion from a bailout. From a bailout.
Do you feel like, because, we talked about this a little bit earlier, like how the banks kind of need us. Do you feel like we should hold the banks more accountable? No. Okay. Well, I mean, in my head, I just started thinking to myself, like, you hold everybody else accountable. Why aren't the banks accountable for this stuff? So why would the people that are putting their money in the banks be so responsible for the mistakes that we're not causing? It's not our fault that y'all chose to raise the interest to a point where people feel like they should take their money out of the bank.
Well, I'll say in a greater response to that is I feel like everybody in government, banking, anything that is involves the greater good of the people or helping all people is not like, oh, we only help this subset of people. Everybody in that respect should definitely be held accountable. And like you said, yeah, we didn't create this deficit. We didn't hand out all this money. We didn't do these things to cause it. So I don't think that we should have to pay for it either. But like I said, I am very interested to see where the rest of that money comes from to replenish it. And if it does get offset to the customers in any way. We'll have to bring someone on to really answer those questions and get into it a lot deeper.
The nitty-gritty of that part.
I just wanted to make sure we got this episode in because it was happening in real time. And I had questions about it, so I knew that I would read up on these articles, and if I'm going to do all this reading, we might as well do an episode. So here we are.
Hopefully this episode has been helpful to anybody that needs to know more about the Silicon Bank Valley closing or collapsing, and also other bank failures. This is a wrap for season 2. Yeah, little dance.
Little happy dance.
Make sure you stay tuned for our upcoming season. It'll be bigger and better, and even better than this was. So yeah, just make sure y'all stay tuned for that. You can follow us on our Instagram and our Facebook pages. They are Hood Health Report, and then our Twitter is Hood Health Pod.
Make sure you follow our YouTube, KVENT, KAYVEEENT, with the Hood Health Report playlist.
Yep, it's been real, guys.
Bye.